We're still a ways away from the WNBA playoffs. We're just now hitting the midseason break. Regular season will end September 11th, but there's some very clear ins and some very clear outs because different from the NBA, the WNBA takes the top 8 teams that will qualify for the playoffs, so it's not determined by conference. And right now, the standings are Minnesota Lynx at the top, 2nd, Phoenix Mercury, 3, New York Liberty, 4, Seattle Storm, 5, Atlanta Dream, 6, Indiana Fever, who jumped from 8 to 6 after last night's win against Dallas, 7, Washington Mystics, and number 8, holding on at the last spot, Golden State Valkyries. And each team still has about 22 games left, so a lot of basketball, but the things we know for sure, the Lynx are not going anywhere. This is a team that lost in the final last year, and they are seeking their revenge tour and to get that championship win. And definite outs, most likely it's going to be the Connecticut Sun. They are really struggling. They're 1-11 on the road this year, and Dallas is not much better than that. But it's really this race for spots 6, 7, and 8. Who is it going to be? Going to be very competitive. Like I said, there's 22 games left in the regular season. So just looking at this top list, this top 8 list, who do you think could be a team that might sneaky make this list for you?
I find this list very interesting because a part of me is like, okay, Kasey, don't try to pull last season into this season. We've talked about it a few times here. Last year, once you kind of hit that midway spot, there was the Olympic break, and we just kind of saw this entire pivot for a number of teams that started kind of making a push for those final spots to get into the mix, and teams that in some categories or to some perspectives had no business making playoffs snuck in there. And we're looking at a different picture now because the Connecticut Sun were one of those teams that like people had categorized as like a sneaky team to beat out the top or kind of get in one of those upper spots there. Looking at this though, I was talking in the bullpen with the guys and I was like, give me something that's not going to be super obvious here. If the Sky could go on some sort of run, if they can become a little bit more consistent, wouldn't be surprised if we feel any sort of, again, if things change, if those things start, our teams start heating up like we saw last year after the Olympic break, that's a team that can probably get into the mix there. But I'm probably more so looking towards the Aces or the Valkyries. You're talking about two teams that are a little bit closer on that cusp there and probably have more consistency out of their players, not just relying on their superstars, maybe a little bit more consistent depth coming into in the mix. More so depth being a Valkyries thing. And I'm sure we'll unpack that team a little bit further. But yeah, I'm trying not to look so closely to like those teams that are really at the bottom and being like, you guys can sneak in here because it's not really
realistic,
the same thing.
Realism.
Exactly. Realism.
No, I mean, it's real. And yes, there's so much season left to go and you never know how a team can rebound after an all-star break and really use that time to regroup or really find their identity, right?
Yeah.
Like identity isn't found even in preseason. Like sometimes it takes until you get to playoffs for a team to really rally around a certain phrase or who they think they are as a team. But I think for me, it's going to be the Las Vegas Aces. This is just a team that historically knows how to win. They know how to do the postseason. And you have one of the most dominant players in the league in Asia Wilson paired with Jackie Young. So I think, yes, it's going to be an uphill battle for this team because of the competitiveness of those top 8 already. But I think if I'm looking at just that between the Sparks and teams like the Chicago Sky, I think I'm going to go with the Aces. But let's dive a little bit more into the Valkyries because they're on this top list, and this is their inaugural season. So how do you feel like this program is feeling right now?
I mean, I feel like they have to be riding a high. The fact that I'm even talking about them being a sneaky contender just says a lot about how this program, and you and I talked about it, Annabelle. We talked about the fact that we felt like they did a lot of the right moves and brought in a lot of the right pieces. And it's almost like they knew the identity that they wanted this team to have, and they drafted and picked up women accordingly. And I think that their record, I think that their capability of sitting on the cusp kind of speaks for itself. And then you have their head coach that just won Coach of the Month in June. So they're firing on a lot of different cylinders, but I think what's really helping them is that it's the team aspect. And that's something else that we talked about as things were coming together, like everybody kind of having the buy-in to play for each other. And like, there's not this like over mention of superstars. This is a team where like everybody has to not only know their role, but like it's more than next woman up kind of thing. So having that depth and performing very well on the road. You mentioned it. There's a few teams where like they're flopping on the road, and when it comes to championship caliber, when it comes to playoffs, like you got to be able to seal the deal on those road wins. So I think them being really strong on the road and just having so much depth on their bench, like this is a team that can be really, really scary. And I think that they're probably stupid excited because the expectation was like, well, we're brand new. So
Right.
like whatever happens, but also like we can compete.
Yeah, and hats off to Natalie Nakase, right, for building
Yes.
that roster that you talked about and not having those superstars, which is hard to do in an expansion draft, right? Like because other teams can protect certain players and there is a risk going to a totally new organization, but I think there's power and it's kind of dangerous that they're able to sub in and out without there
Yes.
being a drastic notice change in depth on what's going
Yeah.
on. And for that team too, like it takes a level of humility at the same time. Like, hey, we don't have this person who's the face of our organization yet. But it's been cool to see the hometown girl, Veronica Burton, being a star and really doing well for that team as well. But I feel like, say the Valkyries were just going to tank right after this All-Star break, I kind of think as an organization, they'd still take that as a win because they're like, hey, before the All-Star break, we came out hot. So I think for me, when you look back at this season, regardless of what happens going forward for the Valkyries, I think it's already a win.
Yeah, I think it's already been a surprise regardless because we didn't. And then actually, you make a great point to mention, like they didn't try to build around a face of the organization. They didn't create a face and go from there. So more importantly, it's not like you had to use these, I don't want to call it tactics because you don't want to dismiss superstars. They earned that name for a reason. But like, you know, they didn't have to do any of these tactics for them to be mentioned or for them to be considered or for them to kind of be a little feared, seeing as how like, hey, this team can surprise you. Like we actually have to strategize against these women. So I think that more importantly, the fact that like they didn't have to do too much. It's 6 by our marketing ideas. They did just enough and built off of it. And I think it's going to be a win regardless. But then also like, you got Natalie Nakase, who like first time head coach. Like I would also feel really inspired to think like, hey, I'm coaching a team that matters and this is my first go at it. Like we know the accolades and we know her resume as its own speaks for itself, but outside of that, she was able to translate it as a coach, which isn't always the easiest thing. Like there's a number of coaches in the WNBA where it's just like, God, if this team had a different coach, we'd be talking about, you know, a completely different record or reputation, Dallas Wings being one of them. So it's really cool to think that like there's so many firsts here that are really going right.
Definitely. And even like cross sports too. We looked at what happened with the New England Patriots, right? And we were saying, oh, you know, first time head coach, like, okay, bring in more of a coach that's tenured and has had serious success in his past. And that's what's so awesome about Natalie Nakase. She is the first year head coach for this organization. And I think what's cool about just the Valkyries' success so far, obviously, we're not even barely halfway through or at halfway through, but all these other WNBA teams who are going to be in this expansion plan, they have this new standard. Like, look at what the Valkyries have done. They're in the top 8 right now before even the All-Star break. So I think that leaves some more competition, and it just raises Natalie Nakase and the value that she really has brought to this organization.